Hi guys, so I'm going to try this again because last time my screen was black. So, um, my action research project was on looking at student engagement and how increased engagement can affect student attitudes towards learning. Um, so that was what I started with, and then I became more specific through my research and focused on the correlation between mini lectures and student achievement. Um, so, um, so my research question was, can a combination of mini lectures and small group activities improve student achievement and student attitudes towards learning? So the background on my school and classes and reason I want to do this is in my Algebra 2 classes, they are non-honors math classes, and there is a high tendency for students to have a general bad attitude about math. And they have strong feelings of inadequacy. They tend to give up easily when they find themselves struggling in math class. And just a little background on maybe why is at our school, the math classes are split into an honors and a non-honors track, and 50% of the student body is in honors. So the non-honors classes have almost become remedial math classes because it's the lower 50% of the student population. And so we have a very wide spectrum of skills. There are still some students who are strong in math, but generally it's students who tend to struggle and need a lot more assistance in math classes. So my rationale for this study and things I wanted to look at were finding ways to help students enjoy learning and enjoy math. I'm constantly asked in class, when am I ever going to use this kind of math outside the classroom? Students are asking this question almost every single day. And so I want to be able to show students the applicability of their math skills and show them how algebra can be useful in their lives. So some of the research that I conducted looked at engagement, some focused on attitudes, and then some was more specific with different kinds of interventions that people used. So this research was on a college introductory level botany course, and most of you know that a general intro level science class is going to have a lot of students. Most college courses have a professor, lecturing at the front of the room for the entire class period, whether that's an hour or an hour and a half. And so this professor split up, they used two sections of the botany course. The first section was just a traditional lecture method, like most college courses, had roughly 250 students. They got lectured to, took notes, had occasional quizzes, and then had exams. And then the experimental class also had 250 students, but they split that one into smaller groups where the students engaged in different types of student-centered activities. And the professor in that section, the active class, used 15-minute mini lectures to clarify concepts or terminology that the professor deemed as being particularly important. If it was a concept that was essential to the course, they would present that in a mini lecture. And then the students were required to go home and do a lot of the reading on their own, to learn some of the material that would typically be presented in a lecture class, because they couldn't cover as much material using the small group activities. And the results from this study showed that the students in the section that had small group activities had a positive impact on their learning. And these results seem to be more significant with low-performing students. So those students in the active class actually scored higher than students in the traditional lecture classes. Some of the advantages of the small group activities include keeping all students accountable. So you can't have any students sleeping in the back of the room while the professor's lecturing, or playing on their phone, or doing other homework, because all the students have to be actively participating in the group. The second article that I looked at was a secondary math class, so a high school math class, using technology to increase student engagement and to try to get students to have fun in math using different technological tools. So in this class, they found that high student achievement was associated with high levels of math confidence and positive attitudes, which makes sense. Usually when you're confident in a subject, you're going to do well on that exam. And they found that students were most engaged when they were required to give full participation in the activities and when they were doing authentic academic work. And then the third article that I looked at was a focus in the Middle East on student attitudes towards math, specifically female attitudes. So they have a much different culture over there than we have in America. And a lot of times in primary years, girls are discouraged from math. And so females typically tend to have a greater dislike towards math because they've been brought up from a young child being told that they shouldn't like math, or they're not good at math, or anything like that. So it's just this constant building on their negative attitudes towards math. So the methods that I used to conduct my study were, I had one control class that was a traditional class, and they received instructional methods that included me lecturing for about 20 minutes at the beginning of class, followed by individual work time to complete their homework. And that's our typical classroom setup, how we do things. And the traditional class did have 32 students. And then in my experimental class, or I called it the active class, it only had 16 students. And so it's a lot smaller class, half as big. And I split up those students into small groups, and they worked on student-centered activities, such as problem-solving exercises or games, working in groups of 3 or 4, and then I would insert occasional 10-minute mini lectures as I saw a need for them. So the goal for the small group activities was to keep the students accountable to their own learning and engaged. And then one of the advantages of those small groups is that myself as a teacher, I'm able to circulate around to all the different groups, and it's a much quicker way to see where every student in the class is at and observe any problems that they're having or confusions, and then I can use those topics for my mini lectures. So for data collection, I collected 2 types of data. The first one was an assessment. So I gave them a quiz prior to the 2-week study. And so that was towards the end of one of our units, and looked at the average scores between the two classes, and then gave them a quiz, both classes the same quiz, at the end of the 2-week study, and then compared the class averages on both the first quiz and the second quiz. And then the student feedback surveys were anonymous, and they were given at the beginning of the unit and at the end of the 2-week study. And those surveys had 4 questions on them where students would circle agree, disagree, or neutral, and then could write comments. And then there was an area at the bottom for the students to write down their favorite activities that they participated in. So I compared the student answers from before the study and after the 2 weeks. So as you can see, the quiz scores increased in both classes. So the traditional class is in blue, and their class average went from 13 out of 20 to 15 out of 20. And then in the active class, their class average increased from 14 out of 20 to 19 out of 20. So the active class had a more significant increase. It was a 25% increase versus the traditional class that had a 10% increase. And so this shows me that the small group activities are having an impact on their achievement. And like I said, one of the factors in these quizzes was that the first quiz was at the end of one unit, and the second quiz was 2 weeks into a different unit. So I was testing on different content, so that could have, and different timing in the unit, so that could have led to the students' increase as well. So on the student feedback survey, here are the graphs representing their answers, and the most significant increases in number of students that agreed with the statements, which were all positive statements, was the first question that said, "I enjoy the process of learning." So a lot more students agreed after the 2-week experiment than prior to it. And then the third question that said, "Group activities help me learn course material." So that jump in students going from neutral to agree also increased after the 2 weeks. So like I said, here's just the raw data. So before the project, 12 students said that they enjoyed the process of learning. And after the 2 weeks, 22 students said that they enjoyed the process of learning. And then before the project, only 8 students felt that group activities would help them learn course material. And after the 2 weeks, 20 students. So that was a large jump. These 2 questions also had an increase, but it wasn't as significant. So being willing to participate in group activities to improve their learning. Prior to the project, 28 students already said, "Yeah, I'm willing to do that. I agree." And so there wasn't a lot of room for more students to jump on board with that, but there was an increase of 2. And then being motivated to do well in math class, about 5 students changed their answer from disagree to agree with that statement. So the conclusions that I came up with based on my study and the research that I found matched up pretty well. That active classes that have a focus on student-centered learning and involve students participating in small group activities increases student achievement. And then student attitudes also increase as a result of the active learning environment. So their attitudes towards math and towards learning tended to be more positive after they were in a more engaging environment. And then just some of the factors that I wanted to talk about that played into my data, and some things to think about for next time were, like I said, the class sizes were very different. So my experimental class only had 16 students, whereas my control class had 32. So those sample sizes are different when I'm taking averages of scores and using results of their feedback. And then the quizzes coming from 2 different units and at 2 different times within those units could have played into the scores. And so being consistent on testing the students with the same course content possibly, or just same subject, not subject, same topic at least within the same chapter or something, could have given better results there. So thank you for listening.